Dr. Nee is both a Hall of Famer, but also a Postel awardee. We look at Dr. Nee, regularly for advice, for guidance, and for knowledge and insights around this technology, this amazing technology that is helping us today, actually, in many sense. Dr. Nee, would like to hear from you a little bit, your perspective on those 50 years of the internet, and particularly how you see it in action within our region.
Okay. Thank you very much, Abia. It's also an honor and privilege for me to work with Steve. I think I'll share some little story, which actually shed light on my own history, and I think it's worth sharing. For a long time, I could not understand how I myself got immersed in the internet engineering early. But Steve once told me that he had worked on a project with a colleague of mine in graduate school at BBM, and that he knew my thesis advisor. Now, that's 1977. Of course, that explained a lot to me, and it was simply that I was at the right place, perhaps at the right time. So thanks a lot, Steve. The internet really, for Africa, has been here in any substantive form for only 30 years or the 50 years. The internet arrived in the region at 91 with 2 countries, and in a decade, every capital city in Africa had a connection. There was nothing internet before. Typically, the business was with the Post and Telecommunications Company, who was not interested in internet at the time. We had infant computer science education with no networking content. We had monopoly telecom policy environment with telco as operator, regulator, and policy advisor at the ministry. This was a difficult environment to introduce new technologies, but we were fortunate that we had some determined engineers who were conscious of a potential digital divide, and they created an urgency to make connections for inclusion. There were both external and internal factors. The internal pressures came from scientists who wanted to reach colleagues overseas. Similarly, there were external pressures with projects and initiatives, and the international community and organizations needed to also reach their homes, so to speak, and so were parties to this discussion. The most important factor, of course, was how the internet itself empowers. That you don't need a permission to use it, and that you can add to it, you can grow it yourself, your little way, and so on. We found players who could transcend the local policy authority, education, and business communities, and whose actions were actually intended to influence policy and force the development. The roadmap was approximately like this. African governments were to proceed with policy reforms, so we pressured for policy reforms. Businesses deployed overlaid networks, and universities began to develop some workforce, and the technical community began to establish regional institutions. So it was 4 pillars. Government started a long reform process to separate post and telecommunications, installing an independent regulator, creating a competitive marketplace, recognizing internet, and then open up the countries to attract investment into building local infrastructure and interconnecting infrastructure to the global world. We deployed networks in the beginning by layering on top of whatever we could find on the telco infrastructure, and then we supplemented by any means that we could also marshal. We were allowed to own telephone numbers, and so we positioned ourselves as value added and extended the networks with our own cables to nearby locations, microwave for slightly longer distances, and eventually satellites. The initial networks were more to connect the global directly and then establish some point of presence. Later on, we began to building nationwide infrastructure, which then connected to the global. We transitioned through other networks. There were community networks. There were several communities, including X25, DECnet, DHCP, FidoNet, some BBSs, on the way to the internet. Email was the first service, and then other richer services followed when full connectivity was attained in these countries. Over time, we managed to increase the local infrastructure, including locally managed CCTLD registries, local ISPs, national entry points, data center, and the telco became the dominant ISP again in the end. Universities were gradually producing computer scientists and electronic engineers for the workforce. Graduates had little hands-on experience, and the local technical community bridged the gap. We had necessities to build regional institutions for the internet. And in 1998, it was proposed to establish a group of technical institutions we call AF* to address focus areas. This is the reason we have today AfNOG for network technology, capacity building, AfNOG numbers registry, AFTLD registries forum, CCA for DTLDs, AF registrars for accredited registrars forum, AfREN for NREN's community, Africa Sept for the CES forum, and so on. There were international initiatives as well, including Leyland Initiative. You may remember some of them: OSTOM, PADIS, SDMP, ICTP, and in ISOC, where the ISOC network technology workshops were most helpful. African Union also engaged with the Africa Commission in NEPAD. However, once the United Nations mainstreamed ICT into development programs, the internet gained public attention, public policy attention, and at WSIS, we knew that we were on our way. Africa did well starting from scratch and attaining 30% penetration in 30 years. There were challenges. Policy reform may have inadvertently consolidated the market and weakened small community ISPs. Meanwhile, governments imposed taxes on internet. Governments are also keen to operate e-government networks and operate CCTLDs. We never have enough infrastructure, making access generally unaffordable and slower. While workforce grew, we also faced brain drain, making it difficult to maintain critical mass in some of the technical areas of interest. In conclusion, here are 3 unfinished work. The adoption of multi-stakeholder bottom-up approach to decision-making has been sticky in Africa, considered a typically top-down environment. We have to respect public interests and take their accompanying responsibilities. The policy environment is slowly becoming unfavorable again, and we need to guard against shutdown and undue violation of privacy in particular. Universities need to improve curriculum towards networks and have to find more sustainable funding models for NRENs in Africa. Africa, as a latecomer, has gone its way with the internet over 30 years. A lot has been learned that will help build the future Africa, but Africa needs the openness of the internet to develop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nee.